All right. And with that, we're ready to announce our speakers for tonight. Tonight's presentation is called Transit Tech is Civic Tech. And we're joined by Kristin Taylor and Ryan Mahoney, who are going to talk about their experiences with the MBTA. So I will let you guys take it away.
All right, let me start sharing. Is my screen sharing? Okay, great. All right. So we're just gonna launch right into it. So our talk is Transit Tech is Civic Tech. Let's see. First, a little quick background. So Kristen and I helped build and sustain one of the most effective in-house civic tech teams at the MBTA in Boston. If, probably not so many people know, but in public transit, tech teams are often a bit scrappy. Maybe it's a handful of people, a lot of reliance on external vendors. In our case, there was sort of an emergence through emergency. In Boston in 2015, there was a snowmageddon, as it was called, and the agency really struggled to get accurate information to riders. And yeah, it was difficult for the agency, difficult for the riders. As a result, the agency decided to form a small in-house team to modernize the public-facing tools, such as their website, mbta.com, as well as the information systems that power things like Google Maps and other apps where riders get accurate real-time information. This group has been around now for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years, and we've been growing. We're currently at, I think, just over 100 people. I'm pretty sure the largest transit tech group in the United States. And it's a pretty diverse team in a lot of different ways, but including like functional skills. So we have UX design, user research, software engineering, content strategists, and product managers.
And one of the things I love the most about our team is that not only do we get to work on the writer facing experience, right? So, what information our writers are receiving and how they may apply for reduce fare. I'll say that twice fast. But we also have this great opportunity to work directly with our operations staff. And we know that a lot of the challenges that writers experience are rooted in challenges that our operations staff face. And so much of our work is in that root cause solving of like, what does the operations staff need to do better at their jobs or to be better supported in their jobs, as well as what information can we gather from them to provide the correct data to our writers. So I'm going to introduce myself real quickly, hand it off to Ryan after that. I'm, like the host said, Kristin Taylor at the MBTA. I'm the director of product design. And in that capacity, I really oversee UX design, research, UX research, service design, and content strategy and content design. And so all of the people who do that good work on our teams report to me. I've grown the team in the past 2 years from about 8 to almost 30. We're tipping 30 people in that design function. And it's such a privilege. We have a passionate team that does great work advocating for operations staff and our writers.
And thanks, Kristen. I'm Ryan Mahoney. I'm the COO of Transit Ops, a nonprofit that works in transit tech, as well as at the MBTA. I am director of engineering, where I oversee about 30 plus software and infrastructure engineers who have deployed over 20 in-house, mostly open source applications that riders use to get vehicle locations, arrival time predictions, real-time information about disruptions. And yeah, we process about 2 billion data transactions per month. So there's a lot going on here. Our first section is called What is Civic Tech, which this group seems to know an awful lot about. But I will say, for those of us who work in public transit, it's a little bit easy to lose sight of this in a way. If you think about it, public transportation is the most immersive way people interact with government service. It has the potential to change the way how people think about how government can support or not support people. It can change cities, create access to financial opportunities. It connects people to healthcare, art, culture, community. Yet technology can make transit more accessible and accessible or less. It really depends on the agency's vision and what they decide ultimately to do with technology. Civic technology or civic tech enhances the relationship between the people and government. In public transit, civic tech is not necessarily the predominant mode of thinking, and many times actually, people have said to me, "Are we gov tech or are we civic tech?" I usually say, well, in gov tech, government people who work in government are essentially the users, and their opinions and perspectives and challenges are really important. But in civic tech, the customer, if you will, is the public, and we really must center the public's objectives, challenges, and in a sense, drive our decisions in a sort of bottom-up fashion. We have I guess, a saying or a slogan or a motto: "We work for riders," and we consider ourselves, even if we're on a laptop somewhere, in a data center, wherever we are doing work, we work for riders, just a little bit differently, but in the same spirit as people on the front lines who are providing information maybe directly to a rider in a station. In public service, like public transit, aligning around people's needs is not optional. In government, there's no powerful survival factor like in a startup forcing us to meet rider needs or go out of business. It's kind of strange when you think about it, but public transit agencies operate a sort of regional monopoly on the type of service they offer. And so it's really up to people who have this civic tech mindset to really drive it and recognize that our job as public servants is to understand people's core needs and support them. And Kristin, take it away.
Find that unmute button. So I'm going to talk a little bit about rider experience, and it's a term that we use on our team. Ryan, if you could flip over to the next slide. So some of you on this call or watching the video afterwards probably have heard the term user experience. I assume a lot of us have. And that term really originated in around the 90s with the consideration of all aspects of a person's experience when interacting with a service or product. And, when I introduced myself, I called myself the director of product design because that's my official title. But I think that product term becomes a little sticky in the public space. And when we think of product design, so we zoom over to 2023 or today, we're in 2024, product and technology focused design is really, what does the interface look like? How can we make this more adopted and adapted, as opposed to what is the experience? What should the experience look like holistically? So if you go to the next slide, this slide really represents that kind of attitude, right? So if you've ridden at the MBTA, which we call the T, right, there's these signs on the green line that really do a good job of showing you the information you might need. 3 minutes, the next train is arriving in 3 minutes, the following 19 minutes after it tells you, which line you're on, the direction you're going to, and has some other information like the cost to ride and some PSAs, public safety announcements, like wear your mask. But without the green line being there, we really have nothing to deliver, right? So in this instance, we can really focus on this sign, but without understanding the whole experience, which is what the train experience is like, what information is available that you may not be able to see, what information is in the palm of your hand, what you might be hearing. It's really hard. That really isn't user experience design, right? That's product design. And so really shifting our focus from product design to user experience design, or if you can go to the next slide, rider experience design is what we like to call it. And so we can click on over to the next slide. Thanks, Ryan. Sorry. And this is all grounded in, our team references the USDS playbook, and the US Digital Services is what that stands for. And the reason I pull this up is because this is not something we invented, right? This understand what people need is play number 1. And number 2, I believe, don't quote me on that, could be 3, is understand the whole experience, right? So not just parts of the experience, but everything. And I think these are key elements to working for riders, to supporting the public and understanding, being able to understand what they need and design around it. Ryan, you're up.
No, you're up.
Oh no, oh, this is me.
Keep
Okay,
keep
here we
it
go.
going.
You got me for some more time. So this next section we're calling understand what writers need. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit of an example of how we do this in our department. So first of all, I want to make sure that we focus on this idea that is kind of differentiating between understanding unmet needs from writers and having leaders define an idea or provide us with a proposed solution, right? And so in our team, this is a challenge we face like any other organization. Being in the public sector, working for public good doesn't mean that we don't face this. We face it all the time. And so I really like us to use writer experience design. We work for writers, et cetera, because it refocuses what we do as based on writers' needs, as opposed to a leadership top-down structure. Next slide. So the way we do this is often by talking and listening to writers. And it sounds very simple, but it takes a little bit of work. And so I'm going to walk through an example of how we've done this. And so the example I like to give is about service alerts. And service alerts are basically little pieces of information that communicate to our writing public about potentially some change or difference in service than what they might expect, right? So we have some schedule data, numbers, predictions, whatever it is. And the service alerts are usually like text form, have a little more content behind them. And the MBTA generates over 150 alerts daily to inform writers about service disruptions. And the generation of 150 alerts is on the operations point of view, right? That might disperse to thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands, 20,000, I don't know the number, but many people across various touch points. So on an app, on the website, on a digital sign in the station, right? But the 150 are generated at the source. And we found a couple of years ago that writers often find these alerts vague and hard to interpret, and they get frustrated by them. They're angry at them, and it causes a lack of trust in the authority in the MBTA. And so we wanted to do something about it. So the way we approach this, we have this really great resource that comes from a writer feedback form and a call center. And so a lot of public transit agencies have a call center. We have one, and they capture all of these pieces of feedback in a database. And so the first thing our research team always does before we do primary research is we pull out that database and understand what the public has been telling us recently about this topic. And so in this case, we gathered over 500 complaints, and we found a few patterns. So these are just a couple of them, right? Writers expected service alert and they didn't get one. Writers were confused by information about delays. And then we had a few other patterns that came up. And so this is just a good example of how we bring those insights together before we start talking to writers. The second thing we do often, not always, is a little bit of a short form survey. The MBTA, we're really fortunate coming from government, in local government before this. I was amazed at how much information we capture and gather from our writers or from our public. It's not very common to do that in the city space. So we have this department that sends out a survey to writers on a regular basis. And that survey typically goes to our writers who take commuter rail. And so we couldn't use that survey. We can add a question into that survey to understand what people were having challenges with on the bus and subway side of the experience, because our commuter rail writers actually found our alerts to be helpful in the previous synthesis. So we're like, well, we don't need to understand more about their experience. They're good with these alerts. What about bus and subway writers? So the way we did this is we went out onto the platform in like yellow vests, all the gear, and we would stop and talk to writers, usually like a little survey that we noted down. At this point, we talked to 60 writers at various locations, depending on, and we chose those locations based on demographics of ridership there. And this slide really goes into kind of the structure of how we would formulate some of those questions. So the top line is us defining what we need to know. The question will ask to learn that, and then our synthesis or summary of that question. And so in this case, we wanted to know what information they look for when their bus or train was late. And we learned that riders, despite the alert being important, they wanted accurate arrival time. So that's prediction, which is different than an alert. And that the delay alert notifications, they wanted them to provide more detail and transparency, right? Which this would prevent them from guessing or wondering if something was wrong. So they wanted something more from our alerts. So the next slide will look into what more they wanted in greater detail, right? So the next step is to do a long form interview. In this work, we did 12 interviews for 60 minutes with various riders. So from people who use assistive technology or were low vision, people who rode every day, people who rode sometimes, and people who didn't have a car at all, and they relied on public transit for daily activities. So we make sure we grab from all different demographics. And in this case, we wanted to know what the broader experience was, pain points and information needs when there were delays. And these, I think the second point I want to, the second like bolded header, I guess you'd call, I want to dig into a little bit, but the important thing that we always do in this phase is to really define what we will change based on our research. And this is a big piece of trust building with the public. So we never want to go out and ask them questions about things we may or may not have control over or intend to do something about. It also builds trust with the organization, right? They don't want us to go out and do all this work unless we can do something to change it. Next slide over. So this is just a snippet of a Slack message, we share after interview. And, we kind of share some audio quotes there too, and like snippets and then a full interview. But in this case, the last bullet point from Carolyn, I want to read. And when we talk to these writers, we always ask, tell us about the experience, the worst delay you experienced while riding the MBTA. Just tell us all about it, what it was like, what it felt like, what you missed, what was good about it. And in this instance, Carolyn shared an experience, I'll just read this, during a planned disruption where she took a shuttle bus that replaced the rail. So it's pretty common here. Before taking the trip, she knew the disruption was happening. So she probably heard it on the news. She may have gotten a text message alert. She may have heard it from her neighbor or saw signs in the station days before, but she was not prepared for the amount of time the trip would take her. And if she knew how long it would take her, she would have taken a different route. Because of that experience, when shuttle buses replace the rail, she takes a different route or chooses not to ride, right? And so really understanding that she had some information, but she was missing other pieces of information was key here in this instance. And we wouldn't have learned that without talking directly to writers. So you can go over to the next slide. And so at this point, we do some synthesis, right? And so in synthesis, we bring together summaries of what we've heard through all three phases of research. So like the first phase of collecting our customer feedback from the forums, the in-station surveys, and then the long form interviews. And this kind of takes this form, right? We have some quotes, the big picture synthesis, when delay alerts are always present, writers easily ignore them. And writers need delay alerts to be more specific, etc. We can go on to the next slide. There's a couple more. Knowing the reason for delay helps writers. And my favorite quote here is, don't piss on me and tell me it's raining. I don't know if I can say that in this. Is that a bad word? I don't know. But
too late now.
Writers really were like, I know you're lying to me. Like, tell me the truth. And so we heard this over and over. The other big thing that is a little more complicated is that writers got conflicting information about service from different channels and touch points. So they might look on a digital screen and see one thing, and on the Google Maps or an app or something and see something else. And so this was a big pain point. They didn't know which piece of information to trust. So we can go to the next slide. And so what then, right? What do we do about this? We learned all these things, and there are some things we've done, other things we're still trying to do. It's a pretty complex space. So this one is pretty straightforward. If you look at the text under where it says delay, it says Route 44 experiencing delays of up to 20 minutes. And we changed that to Route 44 experiencing delays up to 20 minutes due to staffing shortages. And at this point in time, when the alert on the left was being created, there were a lot of staffing shortages, and it was like not a very talked about topic. We weren't very transparent with it as an agency, and people knew. Every transit agency was dealing with the same problem, and people knew it. And so getting to a place where we could be honest about it took some time. We had to negotiate the wording and things like that, but we got there and provided more transparency. So the next what then is really answering this question, where and how do we turn off data? And we're still in the process of doing that, right? We have a product manager and a UX designer working on that now, but you can see, on the left-hand side, there's we call a countdown clock, but it's really a clock in the station on the platform saying our trains are coming every 11 minutes, which is called headways. And then on the right-hand side, they might say, this might be on a digital screen outside of the station, and it might tell somebody what time the train is predicted to come. Those are two different pieces of information. And this happens because of the data source and where it's coming from and where we're turning off and on this data. So on the left-hand side, there's a UI that controls those screens specifically. And on the right-hand side, this comes from our general data pipeline. And so I guess Ryan could probably give us more detail about that, but really understanding where we should turn off the data is what we can answer to get more consistency in information. So next slide, and I'm going to speed through these two. So other places we take or other ways this work takes form is by creating journey maps that really come in the form of service blueprints. So if you're familiar with the service blueprint, it also captures staff's actions and some other things, right? Tools, data, etc. So we have a principal researcher on our team who's done some great work to map out the rider experience and articulate it in this way. So this is something we did with our paratransit department. Paratransit is door-to-door service for people who can't take regular bus or subway for whatever reason. They may have a disability, whether permanent or temporary. And then you can go to the next slide. And then we've also done mapping like this. How do riders adjust plans when a familiar trip is disrupted? And this map is really important to me because it manifests how we've gone from thinking about product design to thinking about user experience design or rider experience design. So you can see we're not talking about how do we design an app to help a rider know how to navigate their trip when it's disrupted. We're saying, how do riders actually adjust plans when a familiar trip is disrupted? And so zooming out at that level helps us deliver on the whole experience. I think you're next, Ryan. Yep.
All right. Top-down solutionism in transit tech. I will say that, and we kind of talked about this a little bit in the beginning, that in public transit, civic tech isn't always a paradigm or an approach that is the normative approach. And I can even say, like, one of the reasons why I appreciate Kristin so much is that I've been in the organization for quite a bit longer. And I would say at one phase, we were doing some really kind of obvious problems that, like, challenges that the public needed. But eventually we got through most of those and we were working on harder things, and it was much more difficult to solve those problems. And part of my job is to attract people to want to work in government and to usually make sacrifices to do that. And I always had this thing of like, hey, you know what? Maybe you don't want to sell ads for Google. Maybe you want to make public transit better for the public. But people that I had recruited who were once happy were starting to wonder at times, like, I don't know, am I, as a software engineer, being deployed to the most important problems? And so when Kristin joined and really brought this civic tech perspective and civic tech mindset, it it sort of spread in the department, and it's been, really exciting for us. But it's kind of odd to think, right? Like, man, this is, of course, yes, we should be listening to the writers. We should be getting this research. We should be synthesizing it. But day to day, sometimes I would say something like, Civic Tech doesn't have a seat at the table, or Civic Tech needs an advocate, or people doing this work as practitioners are sometimes like, oh, I never heard of Civic Tech. That's so interesting. Why would that be, right? If it's such an amazing thing. My theory, or a theory, is that in public transit we have a lot of top-down technology solutionism. So let's just break this down a little bit. Technology solutionism, if you haven't heard of it, I mean, actually kind of doesn't sound so bad, right? It's solving things with technology. That's something we all probably want to do. But this term is a little bit critical, and it refers to this sort of very sort of positive mindset that some people have, where they think that really complex problems can just be broken down into simple engineering problems. But the way that they really simplify these problems is by excluding or ignoring messy and complex social and political complexities. And yeah, if you take out the hardest parts, I guess it would seem simple, but those solutions oftentimes don't really pan out in the real world. You could have this sort of, I mean, I've on many occasions been guilty of this kind of perspective, and it could exist anywhere in any organization. A software engineer, maybe a designer or a manager, but I think it's kind of most nefarious when it's top down, right? So when it's coming from a very senior person who wants to sort of impose a solution to a complex problem based on maybe like sort of their individual experience of riding public transit, or maybe they don't ride public transit at all, and they just have a certain idea of what will be good. It has this effect of overpowering a more rider experience driven approach. And when I've shared this perspective, some people would say, wait a second, but what if you just had the right top-down leader, right? What if you had a top-down leader that was, mostly right, And I think that the truth of the matter is there's no such person who's mostly right about really complex problems, whether it's in public transit or other areas. But what we've seen is that there's a type of technology person that has solved what I would call, or what Kristin would call, a no-brainer. And a no-brainer, and I'll give an example of one, but oftentimes no-brainers have to do with unmet quality or compliance standards for technology. So there was a time when our agency's website did not look great or was hard to read on a mobile device. On a desktop, it was usable, but not on a mobile device. Now, solving this issue of making it, very accessible to mobile users, which is, a majority of users these days, is super important, right? It's going to impact a lot of people. It could be hard to do. It could take resources and money and fundraising and, all kinds of really important skills, but it's not a difficult concept, right? Anybody who was using the website at that time, who attempted to use it with their mobile phone, would know that this is a problem. When we look at some of the other problems that face riders, or that we face just in general, like Kristin was talking about, disruptions, it's really difficult to think of like what is the most effective way that we can ensure that when there is a planned or unplanned disruption, that a person who's going to be impacted, whoever that person is, whether they're someone with small children and a stroller, whether they're just a regular commuter, whoever this person is, if we could just get them this information before they're disrupted, it would make the experience of using public transit so much better. But oftentimes we can't. People are finding this out at the worst possible time, when it's too late to change course. And, if all these amazing leaders had all the ideas, we would have solved that by now, but we really haven't. We've chipped away at it, but it's definitely unsolved. another thing that maybe some people might relate to is that powerful solutionists, they sort of like never know when they're wrong because it's not always safe to tell them. If your manager or your manager's manager or your manager's manager's manager is the one really pushing for a thing, you know, if you're working in government, maybe you need that job and you want to continue to pay your bills and everything. And you can't always really say, look, that's not going to work for these reasons. You might, you kind of have to find your opportunities to be an advocate. And sometimes I think you maybe have to kind of go along with something that you're skeptical of, to build trust and get that sort of seat at the table so that you can advocate for civic tech approaches. The other thing that I think is notable about powerful solutionists is that they value action over thinking, learning, and measuring. So how this might sort of play out is, there's some problem, they're gung-ho about a solution, and maybe that solution gets implemented. And you could have a team member who says, all right, great, like, maybe we didn't define up front what this was really going to do, but let's try to measure things. And a solutionist might be like, whoa, 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 let's solve this other problem. We're not the measuring things, that's in the past. Let's keep doing. And ultimately it's not great for the public. And we really want to spend the right amount of time, which isn't forever, but the time that it takes to really understand what we're setting out to solve and then see if we solved it. I'll try to be quick on these ones, but it's not hard to imagine that public transit riders are everybody, right? They're young, they're old, they're sighted, they're rich, they're poor, they're working, they're homeless. Every different type of person really is a public transit rider. And it doesn't make sense that a small group of people would be making these decisions based on their intuition or like a narrow set of lived experiences. And lastly, I'll say, and I'm curious really how much this resonates with people who are working in civic tech. It's sort of a never-ending struggle when you're working inside of a government agency. Government is hierarchical, and there's always seems to be a bit of a struggle between top-down versus bottom-up power, understanding things from a sort of narrow internal perspective versus making space for multiple perspectives. I think if somebody's like too, I don't know, optimistic might not be the right word, but like you're not always going to be on the winning side of trying to represent the public. And there's going to be a lot of frustrations. But I think if you sort of try to soldier through it, you'll find those chances and those opportunities to be really driving how decisions get made. And Kristin, back to you.
Yeah, that was really great. I feel like we could just end there on those messages. I think it's really, important. I think this is now we turn into story time. So as somebody who's worked in civic tech for a few years, as a civic designer, I want to share an example of when it kind of fell into this trap of leaning on a top-down solutionist technology directive. And I use this story to kind of illustrate how difficult it is and how common this can be. And the reason I think this was difficult for me at the time was that I was working on a team that felt undervalued. I know myself, I personally felt undervalued. I felt like I had to prove, what I was doing was important and it could be impactful because, everything was moving slow. But this was, I was working at the city of Austin, and the director of HUD and some smart cities folks came to my team and said, hey, could you fork this affordable housing application that Alameda County had built for our use? Let's fork it and let's make it a little better, right? So let's make the interface better. Let's make it more usable. As you can see on the left, this is what the desktop version was, which is okay, right? There's a lot of reasons why that is not okay, but it's kind of okay. And then in the middle is what it looked like on mobile. And most of the people who were applying for this housing voucher were doing so on mobile with limited data, which is pretty common. And so my team, we kind of refined the design. We put in some hierarchy. We made the buttons better to use. We made the language clearer, all these really good design standards that you could be proud of, like in the interface. And we took this and we started testing it with real users, so people who were applying for these vouchers or searching for housing. So in the middle, this is a person who was actually in the met us at the head office to do a usability test. And on this one occasion, a woman came into our office to do a usability test, and we were walking through this prototype with dummy data in it, right? So it wasn't real data about houses that she could live in, but and in this, and she was pregnant, had a toddler and a teenager, and she at the time was living in a shelter. So as you can imagine, she was really desperate to find stable housing for her family. And we came into this usability test. She's put in her income, how many people are in her household, went through the flow, and it was really easy. The flow was really easy for her. And when we got to the results were not real. It was dummy data. And she found a place that was near her kid's school, was really excited. And she said, "You mean I could live there? Like right by my kid's school? That would be so great. We could walk to school. My teenager could walk home." And I had to say to her, actually, that's dummy data. So you can't, we don't have enough, really didn't have enough data, and the data wasn't clean. And the real problem was there wasn't enough housing to complete the data set. And so she started crying. I probably started crying too, because that's what I do. And I sent her on her way, and realized after that, I fell into this trap of like, the solution was the interface. No, the solution wasn't the interface. What the public needed was more housing that an interface couldn't solve. And so this is just an example. If you've fallen into this trap, if you've seen it, it's easy to fall into. So I'm going to walk through I'll go quickly through a couple of plays that I've used to kind of counterbalance this, and I'll speed through them because we're super slow on time. So play one is always get leadership on board. So my biggest job at the MBTA is to help my leadership team know when and how research should behave. It's not to take orders from them to execute, but it's really to tell them and to build a strong relationship with them so they trust me. So deliver on the things I say we'll do, and constantly be there to support. Next slide. And then another step in there is to hire at the right level. So I talked to you about product design versus writer experience design or user experience design. In order to do user experience design, you need research happening outside of the product space, which wasn't happening in our department before. We have a principal researcher now who does do product agnostic research, and it helps us really focus on the experience as opposed to understanding what we should do in the product space. We do need to research on the product too, but we can't do one without the other. Next slide. This one, we always build partnerships with internal people, so on our operations staff. And this is really to understand the conflicting views between them and our writers, and to make sure that we support them. So this, if you're not familiar with transit terms, even headways is like even spacing between buses is operations goal. And writers are like, no, we want things to be on time. Those are conflicting goals, completely conflicting goals. And so really understanding that there is conflict there is important. So we talk to our operations staff. You can go to the next slide quickly. And this is because what happens on the operations side definitely impacts the writer experience. And so we want to make sure we understand both points of view. If we are over leveraged on the writer experience, we wouldn't be able to solve at the root cause. If we only went to the operations staff and said, okay, we want to solve this problem for writers, they'd be like, get out of town. So we also have to go in and help them do their job, or give them the tools to do their job better and the support. Next slide. And I think this is maybe last one. No, there's two. We want to assess landscape of opportunities. So really this is doing that big picture research across an experience to help us know where we should focus our work. Okay, Ryan, next slide. Then I think I'm done. And then we always want to prioritize by impact. And this requires us going in and having conversations about how we're going to prioritize and what measures of impact we want as a team, and how writers or our ops staff fit in. And then I think we're up for questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was great. And also, like, there were so many good points. I don't know if you're watching the YouTube chat, but people are mostly appreciating all the great points that you made along the way and all that. So just wanted to make sure that you got to hear that as well. So I think like one question that I'm just kind of curious about is like, what is the most, like looking back, like what's the most surprising thing that you took away from like the whole feedback gathering process, whether about like the process itself or like an individual piece of feedback?
You mean in that one case study or that one, the disruption information one I shared, or in general?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's surprising after the fact, but it's surprising when you're in it, is that most of what we're talking about there is information, is what kind of information writers might want. And really what they want is service to be better, right? And that really reflects in like the sign in the desert, right? Is like writers with the information, the good information doesn't matter if service is bad. And so really being able to listen to that, make space for that. And there's interviews where people have gone on and on and on about that and express frustration, right? Because it really impacts their life. And then being able to hear it and then recenter them and say, I wish I could change that. And what I have control over is information. So help me know what information you would help you, right? So not surprising, but always surprising.
There's another. Troy has a question. There's another question from the audience. Somebody wants to know if you're hiring, even if they are a Yankees fan.
Yes, especially if they're a Yankees fan.
Care to expound?
We mentioned earlier that the department has grown. I think when I joined, there might have been like 12 or 15 people, and now there's over 100. So I'm not looking at the jobs or posting thing now, but if you go to ctd.mbta.com, and hopefully someone can put this at ctd.mbta.com, that website has a link to some job posts, and I know that there are a few engineering roles, and probably, I don't know, Kristin, if you have certain roles that you want to plug, but generally speaking, we are, with this many folks and this many projects, we're hiring on an ongoing basis for the type of roles we discussed earlier. So engineering, research, design, product management, things of that nature. Content strategy.
Nice. One more question, or I think we might be able to get two more in. Any tips for what to do when you're being asked to put a tech fix band-aid on a bigger resourcing issue? And this person noted, like the housing example, better application is still good, but not enough.
Kristin, let me know if you want to field that one or if I should.
If you have a good answer, and I'll build on it.
Well, I would just throw out that I disagree that, building an app is always going to be better than not having one. In the case that Kristin actually provided, the reality was that either the housing didn't exist, or even the best information that they had, I believe once they looked into it, they found out that it often was inaccurate, right? So I would say that an app like this, that the underlying data is inaccurate, is just a more efficient way to piss people off, right? We talked about earlier, like some signs that we would turn off when we knew the data was bad, because it's better to say nothing than to like knowingly mislead people. But I will pass it to you, Kristin.
No, I'm not going to add to that. I think that was perfect.
All right. So two people sort of asked about this, but how has the MBTA been able to politically justify having such a large in-house tech staff versus relying on external contractors?
Kristin, should we even touch this one?
Oh, this is a sticky subject. I think I'll let you, I'll throw you out to
I'm
reveal
less to
this.
lose, I'm gonna just try to be general. I don't want to get fired. I think that a reality that we face in the public sector is that some of the ways that tech jobs are categorized or characterized is itself not modern. And if you do not pay a rate that that's competitive, but also livable and so on and so forth, you're not going to attract. I mean, I shouldn't say that because we know that like amazing people work in civic tech, but I think that when they're underpaid, they're not going to last. Something is going to happen in their life. They're going to want to get married. So they're going to need money, right? They can't like sacrifice themselves and their opportunities indefinitely. So it's important for government to meet the needs of people. And if you really think that's important, then you're really going to have to attract and hire people who have the skills and abilities to deliver these type of services according to, the methods that Kristin advocates for. So, I think in this government agency, they found a way using a statewide contract that enabled them to hire contractors, which contractors do typically make more than a full-time employee would make in government. But there's ongoing work to change the internal structure so that it wouldn't require what might look like a hack itself or a workaround. And I think myself and many others are sort of involved in like agency-wide advocacy to say you need in-house staff and you have to make it sustainable. Therefore, you have to pay competitive wages.
Can I build on that real
Please.
quick too? From the research perspective, especially in public transit, our relationships with operations staff, so the people who deliver day-to-day transit at 5 a.m., at midnight, they're out there when it's snowing, is crucial to us doing our job. And I don't think a third-party company could effectively do that because they come in and out. And we have built relationships over many, many years with people who would, rightfully be like, who the heck are you in skinny jeans and like coming from the city to try to learn about my job? I've been doing this for 30 years. What? And then we end up building those relationships of trust. We help provide tools that they need. We listen to them, we work with them, we try to understand them. When we bring out a digital tool that's new to them, we sit there with it in our hands and walk through it with them. And so that is key to our team success. And I don't know of a agency, like a third-party agency, that could do that same thing. And so I would say, flip that question around. Why don't other agencies focus on internal capacity building instead of hiring outside?
And our timing is perfect. We are out of time, but I hope that you will join us in the breakout section. Katie, I'm going to put myself on mute because I have a dog that wants to go to bed.
For sure, no problem. And I think that you two mentioned that if there were any sort of remaining burning questions, it would be okay if people reached out to you.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Josh, would you be able to put that into the YouTube chat, please? I'll copy it over just in case. But in any case, like we mentioned earlier, we have our post-presentation Zoom call starting any minute now. You can hop on over as soon as you're done here. And yeah, we'll talk through all the breakout groups going on, and you'll get a chance to ask questions about Chai Hack Night if you've never been here before, that kind of thing, and get to know other people who come to Chai Hack Night. So if you want to hop over to that, bit.ly/ well, it was on the screen. So if you can't find it, join us on Slack and you'll find it there too. But yeah, I think with that, I think we can say the classic line, which I don't know, Adam, if you're able to unmute, but if not,
go forth
and hack. Thanks, everybody.